Ever since it's been adapted into television, the Regency drama Bridgerton has rekindled a different kind of spicy romance in all of its viewers. History-wise, fans have been asking the important questions. Did everyone in Bridgerton have syphilis? Just how sexy would it really have been in Regency-era London? Find out all about this topic and more in today's video, so stay tuned. First up, were STDs a thing during the Regency era? Bridgerton's success may be attributed to a variety of elements, including a compelling storyline, clever casting selections, stunning costume design, and of course, the fact that the show is extremely sensual. Since Mr. Darcy's wet shirt moment in the 1995 rendition of Pride and Prejudice, Bridgerton has finally satiated an endless need for historical romance and borderline erotica. The show takes place in the early 19th century, near the conclusion of the Georgian era and the middle of the Regency period. By the age of 35, 1 in every 5 Londoners will have contracted syphilis, also known as the pox. If that wasn't frightening enough, historians think that the number of people who caught gonorrhea or chlamydia was far greater. Professor Simon Szreter, a historian, says that at the time, the city had an alarmingly high rate of STIs. It appears plausible to assume that the majority of persons residing in London as young adults during this period caught an STI at some point. There was no effective cure for syphilis until the early 20th century, which meant that if you were among the unlucky 20% of society, there was little hope of recovery. So did some of the characters in Bridgerton have it at one point? The love interest of the eligible Viscount Anthony Bridgerton and the spinsterly Kate Sharma is at the center of the drama in the recently released Season 2 of Bridgerton. Anthony's plans to court the Queen's favorite and Kate's younger sister, Edwina Sharma, complicate their enemies-to-lovers romance. Kate's first objection to the match is based on Anthony's unpleasant demeanor, as well as rumors of his licentious past. Miss Sharma is quite correct in rejecting her sister's match on the grounds of the Viscount's libertine history, especially given the prevalence of syphilis during the period. Anthony often engaged sex workers to help him blow off steam at the end of the day, as a titillating montage at the beginning of the first episode reminds us. During this time, brothels and other forms of sex trade flourished across England, earning the moniker the Great Social Evil. To the west of London, brothels catering to upper social classes were mostly run by women, whilst the East End's bawdy houses were mostly run by males. By the mid-18th century, it was claimed that women ran half of London's brothels. Brothel madams were thought to be more courteous when dealing with clients. Frequenting these places was something that lords, and in rare circumstances ladies, did regularly, but it was not something that should be discussed in polite society. The spread of syphilis and the popularity of these businesses were not wholly unrelated, as one might suppose. The disease was especially prevalent among young, impoverished, usually unmarried women, who relied on commercial sex for financial support, according to admission records from London's hospitals and workhouse infirmaries. Because there was no effective cure for the pox, people who got it were often given mercury, which, thanks to our contemporary worldview, we now know is just as bad, if not worse, than untreated syphilis. A night with Venus and a lifetime with Mercury became a common saying at the time. As a result, people of high society, such as Anthony Bridgerton, were more likely to have a more exclusive arrangement with a chosen mistress or mistresses. This solution allowed lords to reduce their infection risk without giving up their favorite hobby. And now, prevention is always better than a cure, which wasn't available at the time. Not only was there a lack of a cure for STIs, but also prevention strategies. Condoms existed, but they were not nearly as commonly available, recommended, or effective as they are today. Mrs. Phillips, who had a shop in Leicester Square, was one of the most prominent condom sellers in London, especially for sex workers. Mrs. Phillips produced these out of sheep and goat gut, pickled, then molded by hand in glass molds. While better than nothing, the material used to manufacture these condoms meant that they were prone to breaking. The first successful cure for syphilis would not be discovered until the 1910s, when the medicine Salvarsan was developed. Mercury was the principal treatment for the condition up until this point. With the invention of penicillin in the 1940s, a safe and accessible remedy was provided. While Bridgerton is not constrained by the often suffocating constraints of historical truth, it is fascinating to contemplate the dirtier environmental variables that did have an impact on the realm of balls and fine fabrics. So how accurate is Bridgerton's story of sex and scandal in Regency England? And since we're already diving deep into how accurate the portrayal of Regency-era London is, we might as well look into some of the tales and scandals tackled in the show. Next, what was the marriage market? According to Hannah Grieg, historical consultant for Bridgerton, a tiny number of aristocratic British families arrived in London each year for the roughly 6-month social season, when balls and concerts, dinners, and other opulent festivities brought together eligible young men and women. The season began as young women from noble families were introduced to the real-life Queen Charlotte during a ball she first first hosted in 1780, while standing behind an enormous birthday cake as represented in the series. The custom continued with each monarch until Queen Elizabeth II abolished it in 1958. The goal was to bring together wealthy, powerful families and maintain the money and power inside a pretty tight circle of society by regulating the pool of suitors. According to Grieg, women like Daphne would have had some say in who they danced with or publicly courted, but the pool of bachelors was small and only a few of them would have been desirable. She explains that's what gives it the market aspect. Daphne and Simon walked the promenade together to give the impression that they were dating. Going public with chaperones was an important part of the wooing process. When people see a couple together, it's assumed that they're engaged to be married, Grieg adds. Marriage is about displaying yourself in public, not just a private contract. There was a lot of pressure on women to be married in a single season, wherein you'll never really be recognized as eligible if you return for a second season, she adds. According to historian Amanda Vickery, author of The Gentleman's Daughter, Women's Lives in Georgian England, courting takes a year in Austen's works, and any longer would put female reputation in jeopardy. So will a lady be ruined if she is caught alone with a man? Daphne would have been in serious danger if someone had caught her canoodling with a man in a dark garden as she did. According to Vickery, a good young lady could never be alone with a man she didn't know. She should not just be pure, but she should be seen to be pure. Chastity, modesty, and obedience were the preeminent female virtues. Her sexual virtue had to appear unimpeachable, or she would be ruined on the marriage market. Remember how tender a thing a woman's reputation is, how hard to preserve, and when lost, how impossible to recover. Vickery quotes James Fordyce, a pastor who wrote the renowned book Sermons for Young Women. According to Grieg, all of this policing was motivated by profit rather than morality. The goal of marriage in the aristocracy is to produce a legitimate heir. So if the validity of the person inheriting that land is in dispute, it throws the whole premise into turmoil. In public, young women would be escorted by a chaperone, who could be an older relative or even a friend of the same age. The goal was to keep their reputation intact and minimize their interaction with people of the other sex, lest they fall for an actor, footman, or someone else improper. According to Grieg, these women were treated as property, assets to be handled, according to the author. Finally, were the women sexually educated? Probably not so much. Married sisters or friends, according to Leslie A. Hall, a gender and sexuality historian, may have offered some information. It's also clear that servants' gossip passed on knowledge to children, though it wasn't always helpful or accurate. It wasn't until the late 19th century that feminists involved in the social purity movement began to argue that it was wrong to equate ignorance with innocence, and that girls should have some knowledge of sexual matters. Daphne is the eldest of the Bridgerton daughters. Therefore, she has no married sisters to seek advice from. Her mother is her lone source of advice, telling her what to expect on her wedding night in hazy rain metaphors. Whatever the situation may be, a polite young woman seeking to marry well would have needed sexual naivety, or at least the illusion of it, according to Vickery. With that, we're wrapping up today's video about the truths behind Bridgerton's Regency era. Hopefully you learned a lot in today's episode. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to our channel before you go with the notification bell on, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.